This program examines events from the Northern Ireland conflict using court findings, official investigations, and contemporaneous reporting. Some matters discussed were never tested in criminal court. Where that is the case, it is stated clearly. This episode also references later investigative work and public commentary, which are identified as such. Every armed organization develops internal rules. Some enforce them publicly, others enforce them quietly. During the Northern Ireland conflict, violence was not only directed outward, it was also turned inward. Within the Provisional IRA operated an internal security unit. Its purpose was to identify, interrogate, and deal with suspected informers. The unit operated in secrecy. Those detained were held without legal process, often in unknown locations, and interrogated under conditions that involved violence and coercion. In some cases, interrogation ended in execution. Control of information was absolute. Fear was structural. Power rested with those who determined outcomes. One case illustrates how that power functioned. In 1990, Sandy Lynch was abducted by the IRA and taken to a house in West Belfast, where he was interrogated under suspicion of being an informer. He was held by members of the Internal Security Unit. Sinn Féin's Danny Morrison arrived at the house. It has been suggested he was there to give the IRA Army Council's death sentence verdict to Lynch. However, Morrison was Sinn Féin's director of publicity and insisted he was there to organize a press conference. The house was immediately raided by the security forces. Arrests followed. Danny Morrison was one person who was subsequently convicted in connection with the kidnapping. Others alleged to have been involved in the abduction and interrogation were not charged, causing suspicion within the IRA, both in prison and on the streets. Stakeknife left the house shortly before the rescue operation, hiding outside of Belfast until his handlers told him he was safe to return and avoid conviction. Morrison and his co-accused were later exonerated and paid compensation. The significance of the case does not lie in how it ended, but in what followed. Accountability did not fall evenly. The episode became emblematic of how proximity to internal violence did not necessarily lead to consequence. Stakeknife was said to be recruited in the late 1970s. Theories of how and why include him becoming an agent to avoid a VAT fraud charge, being caught drink driving, or more sensationally, that he walked into a police station and volunteered his services after a falling out with fellow Republicans. Whichever, if any, is true, his recruitment led to him being involved in multiple murders while enjoying the protection of police and military intelligence. Rather than arrest him for murder, his handlers let innocent people die to protect what became known as the jewel in the crown of agents. He was eventually placed in a leadership position within the internal security unit of the IRA, the so-called nutting squad. Hardened IRA members would openly admit that they would prefer to face violence at the hands of the British Army or RUC than be summoned by the internal security unit. Canova did not reach a definitive conclusion on personal motive. However, it found that financial reward formed a significant and sustained part of the handling relationship. The agent received substantial payments over an extended period. These payments were structured and continuous. Crucially, Canova found no evidence that payment was contingent on preventing violence. Financial reward continued even as the agent remained involved in serious criminality, including murder. Later investigative work, including Stakeknife's Dirty War, argues that this relationship created a system of incentives the state failed to control. Canova itself stopped short of that conclusion, but it confirmed the underlying facts. Canova found that elements within the state were aware that the agent had been involved in murder. Despite that awareness, he continued to be handled and protected. No effective action was taken to prevent further crimes. Canova found no evidence of a centrally directed policy authorizing killing. However, it did find a willingness to tolerate lethal violence in order to preserve intelligence access. This distinction matters. The investigation described not intent, but failure. Failure to intervene, failure to withdraw the agent, failure to prioritize the lives of those targeted by the internal security unit. Canova described this as a profound moral failure. It emerged last year that MI5 had failed to hand over key documents linked to Stakeknife until after an interim report was published by the Canova team. In its final report, Canova has highlighted the difficulties it faced with MI5 in advance of its interim report. Published last March, the Canova team has revealed that MI5 members broke into a safe used by investigation liaison officers working at Thames House. In addition, it also emerged that MI5 personnel knew and had used the combination code for a secure safe used by Canova liaison officers working at its Thames House headquarters to store classified material, the report states. This only came to light when one member of MI5 staff said that they had retrieved a file from the safe. The combination had to be changed as a result, thereby eroding an element of trust that Canova thought had been established. Despite previous attempts by MI5-linked individuals to distance the agency from Scappaticci, Operation Canova has said its knowledge was not limited. MI5 was aware of Stakeknife's recruitment from the outset and knew about his identity, role within PIRA and its internal security unit, and involvement in the abduction and interrogation of suspected agents who were then murdered, the report states. At one point when Stakeknife was wanted by the RUC, in connection with an abduction and interrogation, MI5 was aware of his whereabouts and the fact that he was continuing to meet his FRU handlers. Canova concludes that MI5 was involved in briefing and tasking Stakeknife via the FRU throughout his operation as an agent, and it received debriefs on all his intelligence and was involved in discussions with FRU and RUC-SB, Special Branch, about his role, importance, and use. MI5, at FRU's request, provided an administrative support officer to maintain an accurate filing record of FRU intelligence, including that derived from Stakeknife. Over the years, victims' families described encounters with the man publicly alleged to be Stakeknife. According to reporting and witness accounts, some said he made dismissive or taunting remarks about the deaths of their relatives. They spoke of how he would describe details of their loved ones' last moments and how they were murdered. He enjoyed seeing their horror. These accounts were never tested in court. Their significance lies in what they reveal about power after violence, the ability to revisit someone's grief without fear of consequence. Following the publication of the Canova report, media organizations increasingly named the individual alleged to have operated as Stakeknife. The name most frequently reported was Freddie Scappaticci, a Belfast man who died in 2023. Despite this, the British government continued to apply the policy of neither confirm nor deny. The chief constable of the PSNI stated that had the agent been solely a police informer, and not also a military intelligence asset, he would have been named. This highlighted a central tension. Secrecy was not rooted in uncertainty about identity. It was rooted in institutional boundaries. Freddie Scappaticci was born in Belfast in 1946. He grew up in the markets area around other Italian families and became involved with the Provisional IRA. He worked as a bricklayer and later settled in a large home in West Belfast with his wife and children. In 2003, he eventually left Northern Ireland amid increasing scrutiny after he was named as the agent Stakeknife. At first, he stayed in Belfast and denied the accusations. He held a press conference in his solicitor's office and read a prepared statement. It was reported that he spent the previous weekend meeting his alleged handlers and was confident he could convince people the reporting was untrue. He is also reported to have had a meeting with the IRA and that they had two senior members positioned across the street from the press conference. Initially, Jerry Adams and even Danny Morrison denied the allegations against Scappaticci. So shocking was this revelation to the Republican movement. Morrison now strangely says he knew he was an agent as far back as 1990, and his initial denials were to stop dissident Republicans using it to their advantage, a claim mocked and dismissed by Republicans of all shades. Days later, he was gone. Newspapers sensationally claimed he had bought a mountain in Italy and relocated there, dipping into his fortune from decades of being allegedly paid £70,000 per year. In reality, he relocated closer to home. He gave secret evidence to the Smithwick inquiry into IRA collusion, with his solicitor negotiating a payment of almost €500,000. In 2020, he was convicted in an English court of offences relating to the possession of extreme pornographic material. He walked free. That conviction was unrelated to the allegations examined by Canova. He died in England in 2023. He lived in a large house in an exclusive area. Locals knew him as Frank Conway. However, his death certificate named him as Frank Cowley. His will has been sealed by the state. Stakeknife's victims' families were furious that the government still protected him after his death. He was never charged or convicted in relation to murder. Despite the scale of the investigation, no prosecutions followed. Canova identified evidential barriers: time, destroyed or missing records, intelligence material that could not be converted into admissible evidence. The absence of prosecution did not equate to the absence of wrongdoing. It reflected the limits of criminal justice in addressing legacy violence. Immediately following the publication of the Canova report, solicitors representing affected families delivered a public statement at a press conference. KRW Law described the investigation as substantial but incomplete. They criticized the continued use of neither confirm nor deny. They raised concerns about intelligence access to the investigation itself, and they confirmed that legal challenges were underway. For the families represented, Canova marked not an ending, but a threshold. This is not a story about one informer. It is a story about systems, about how power operates in secret, about what states tolerate and protect in pursuit of advantage, and about the limits of truth when accountability depends on silence. Operation Canova established what could be proven. What happens next will be decided elsewhere. Families refuse to live in the shadows of shame any longer. They want to fight for the truth being hidden by the invisible faces of one of the world's most powerful intelligence apparatus. Will the state help the families to finally find justice for their murdered loved ones? Or will they protect themselves under the guise of protecting a dead man? Is there others we have yet to hear of, who were similar or even worse than Stakeknife? This is the Irish question.